The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine white corridors of Sunspire Academy, the most prestigious military training institution in the known galaxy. Cadet Zara Velthane adjusted her uniform nervously as she walked toward the orientation hall, her chitinous exoskeleton clicking softly against the polished floors. Around her, hundreds of young beings from dozens of species moved with similar purpose, their conversations creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones. Sunspire Academy had been accepting the finest military minds from across the Galactic Confederation for over 3 centuries. The Academy's reputation was legendary. Its graduates became fleet admirals, strategic commanders, and diplomatic peacekeepers who maintained order across thousands of star systems. For most species, receiving an invitation to attend was the highest honor imaginable. Zara's compound eyes swept across her fellow cadets, noting the familiar faces of her own kind, the crystalline Velthari, alongside the graceful aquatic Nereid delegation and the towering plant-like Arborean contingent. Everyone moved with the careful precision that marked civilized society. No sudden movements, no raised voices, no unnecessary aggression. It was the way things had always been among the enlightened species of the galaxy. The orientation hall buzzed with polite conversation as Admiral Keth Moore, a distinguished Centaurian with silver-scaled skin, took the podium. His 4 arms gestured elegantly as he began the traditional welcome speech that had been delivered to countless generations of cadets. "Welcome, future guardians of peace," the Admiral began, his melodious voice carrying easily through the hall. "You represent the finest your species have to offer. Here at Sunspire Academy, you will learn the sacred arts of defensive warfare, peaceful resolution, and strategic retreat. You will master the technologies that protect life rather than destroy it." Zara felt a familiar warmth spread through her thorax. These were the values she had been raised with, the principles that had guided galactic civilization for millennia. Warfare, when absolutely necessary, was conducted with restraint. Weapons were designed to disable rather than kill. Conflicts were resolved through negotiation and strategic positioning rather than brute force. However, Admiral Keth Moore continued, his tone shifting slightly, "This year brings a unique opportunity. For the first time in our Academy's history, we will be hosting a delegation from a newly discovered species. They call themselves humans." A ripple of excited whispers ran through the assembly. New species were rare discoveries, and first contact protocols were always fascinating case studies. Zara leaned forward with interest. "These humans come from a world they call Earth, located in what they term the Sol system. Their application for Confederation membership has been unprecedented. Their technological development has been remarkably rapid, and their approach to conflict resolution is—" The Admiral paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Unique." The massive doors at the rear of the hall opened with a soft hiss, and conversations gradually died as every head turned to see the newcomers. Zara's breath caught in her throat as she got her first look at the humans. They were smaller than she had expected, roughly the size of a Nereid, but with a solid, dense build that suggested surprising physical strength. Their skin was an odd, pinkish-brown color, and they moved with a fluid grace that was somehow both relaxed and alert. What struck her most, however, was their eyes. Unlike the large, gentle eyes of most sentient species, human eyes were small, forward-facing, and held an intensity that made Zara's exoskeleton tingle with an unfamiliar sensation. The human delegation consisted of 12 individuals, all wearing what appeared to be a simple black uniform that looked almost primitive compared to the elaborate ceremonial dress of the other species. They moved as a unit, maintaining perfect formation without any visible communication devices or coordination signals. Admiral Keth Moore's voice carried a note of careful diplomacy as he continued. The human delegation will be participating in all standard Academy training exercises. Their inclusion represents a wonderful opportunity for cultural exchange and mutual learning. One of the humans, a female with short dark hair and those intense brown eyes, stepped forward and inclined her head in a gesture that Zara assumed was some form of respectful greeting. When she spoke, her voice was clear and carried an odd quality that seemed to cut through the ambient noise of the hall. "Thank you for this opportunity, Admiral. We look forward to learning alongside our fellow cadets and sharing our own experiences in return." There was something in the way she said "experiences" that made several cadets shift uncomfortably. Zara noticed that the human's hand rested casually near a device on her belt that looked unlike any tool she had ever seen. As the orientation continued, Zara found herself stealing glances at the human delegation. They listened attentively to explanations of Academy protocols, nodding at appropriate moments, but there was something in their posture that suggested they were constantly evaluating their surroundings. It wasn't the nervous alertness of prey animals, but something else entirely, something that made Zara's primary brain uncomfortable in ways she couldn't articulate. The first surprise came during the weapons familiarization session. Instructor Yelthara, a peaceful Eldoran with gossamer wings, led all the new cadets to the Academy's armory to examine the standard defensive equipment used in galactic military operations. "As you can see," the instructor explained, gesturing to a wall lined with elegant crystal-based devices, "our weapons technology focuses on disabling rather than destroying. These sonic disruptors can incapacitate an opponent without permanent harm. These neural dampeners can render an enemy unconscious while leaving them completely uninjured. And these plasma nets can immobilize entire squads while causing no physical damage whatsoever." The cadets examined the weapons with appropriate reverence. These were tools of last resort, used only when peaceful negotiation had failed completely. Even then, they were designed to end conflicts quickly and humanely. The human designated as their leader, who had introduced himself as Commander Marcus Chen, raised his hand politely. "Instructor, may I ask about the effective range and power requirements of these systems?" "Certainly," Yelthara replied warmly. "The sonic disruptors have a maximum effective range of approximately 50 meters and require a 7-second charging cycle between applications. The neural dampeners must be within 20 meters of the target and require direct line of sight. The plasma nets have the longest range at nearly 100 meters, but take nearly 15 seconds to deploy and another 10 to recharge." Commander Chen nodded thoughtfully. "And these represent the standard armament for Confederation forces?" "Indeed. Our military philosophy emphasizes protection and preservation. Quick, clean resolution to conflicts with minimal harm to all parties involved." Another human, a tall male with sandy hair, spoke up. "What about situations where the enemy doesn't share those same philosophical constraints?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Several cadets made soft sounds of distress at the very concept. The idea that any civilized being would deliberately choose to cause unnecessary harm was almost incomprehensible. Instructor Yelthara's wings fluttered nervously. "Well, such situations are theoretical, of course. The Galactic Confederation has maintained peace for over 800 years, precisely because all member species share common values of restraint and preservation." "Of course," Commander Chen said smoothly. "We were simply curious about contingency planning." But Zara noticed that the humans exchanged quick glances that suggested they found something significant in this conversation. Their expressions remained politely neutral, but there was something in their eyes. That same intensity she had noticed earlier, but sharper now. The second surprise came during combat simulation training. The Academy used sophisticated holographic systems to create realistic battle scenarios where cadets could practice their skills without any risk of actual harm. The simulations always focused on defensive tactics, strategic withdrawal, and minimizing casualties on both sides. Zara found herself assigned to a mixed squad that included 3 humans. The scenario was a classic training exercise. Their position was being attacked by aggressive raiders, and they needed to hold their ground long enough for reinforcements to arrive while minimizing damage to both their own forces and the attackers. As the simulation began, Zara took her assigned position behind a defensive barrier and powered up her sonic disruptor. The holographic raiders appeared at the far end of the training ground, moving in the predictable patterns that characterized most enemy behavior in these exercises. What happened next would replay in Zara's memory for years to come. The humans didn't take defensive positions. Instead, they moved forward with a fluid coordination that was unlike anything she had ever seen. They spread out in a formation that seemed random, but somehow maintained perfect mutual support. And their movements, Zara watched in fascination as the 3 humans flowed across the battlefield like water, using cover and concealment in ways that the Academy instructors had never taught. They anticipated the holographic enemy's movements with uncanny accuracy, always appearing exactly where they needed to be at precisely the right moment. But it was their weapons handling that truly shocked her. While she and the other cadets carefully aimed their disruptors and waited for optimal targeting solutions, the humans moved and fired with casual precision. They seemed to hit their targets without conscious aiming, their weapons becoming extensions of their bodies in ways that defied explanation. Within 3 minutes, the entire wave of holographic raiders had been neutralized. The humans regrouped at the center of the training ground, breathing slightly harder but otherwise appearing completely unaffected by what had just transpired. The silence in the observation booth was deafening. Instructor Vel Karan, an elderly Nabari with decades of military experience, stared at the tactical display with all 4 of his eyes wide with disbelief. "Computer, replay the engagement at half speed." As the simulation replayed, Zara watched more carefully. The humans hadn't just defeated the raiders quickly, they had done so with an efficiency that bordered on impossible. Every movement had been precisely calculated. Every shot had found its target. Every tactical decision had been optimal. "Computer," the instructor said in a voice that barely concealed his shock, "analyze the human tactical pattern and compare it to our standard combat doctrine." "Analysis complete," the computer replied in its neutral tone. "Human tactics show 0 correlation with Confederation military doctrine. Pattern suggests emphasis on aggressive positioning, maximum efficiency, and complete neutralization of enemy forces. No evidence of restraint protocols or casualty minimization procedures." The observation booth erupted in concerned chittering and whistling from the various species represented among the instructors. Zara felt her own exoskeleton tingle with a mixture of fascination and unease. Down on the training ground, Commander Chen looked up at the observation booth with those intense brown eyes and asked in a perfectly calm voice, "How did we do, instructor?" That evening, Zara found herself in the Academy's vast library, trying to research anything she could find about these mysterious humans and their homeworld. The information was surprisingly limited for a species that had achieved interstellar travel and applied for Confederation membership. Earth was listed as a Class 12 death world, a classification so extreme that Zara had to look up what it meant. The definition made her mandibles click in disbelief. A planetary environment characterized by extreme predation, violent weather patterns, geological instability, toxic atmospheric conditions, radiation exposure, and ecosystem competition so severe that survival requires constant vigilance and aggressive adaptation. No wonder the humans moved the way they did. They came from a world where everything was trying to kill them. As she continued reading, More disturbing details emerged. Earth's gravity was nearly twice what most species considered comfortable. Its oxygen content was so high that it would be toxic to many Confederation races. The planet was home to countless species of predators, some of which actively hunted sentient beings. But most shocking of all was a small notation in the planetary classification database. Caution. Death World inhabitants may exhibit psychological and behavioral adaptations unsuitable for standard diplomatic protocols. Zara closed the terminal and sat back in her chair, her mind racing. She thought about the way the humans had moved during the combat simulation, the intensity in their eyes, their casual questions about weapons and enemy tactics. What exactly had the Galactic Confederation invited into its most prestigious military academy? The answer to that question would come soon enough, but when it did, it would change everything that the civilized galaxy thought it knew about warfare, survival, and what it truly meant to be a predator among the stars. The next morning brought the Academy's first live-fire exercise of the semester, an event that typically generated excitement among cadets eager to test their skills with actual weapons rather than simulators. Zara arrived at Training Ground 7 to find an unusual amount of security personnel present, their crystalline armor gleaming in the pale morning light. Admiral Kethmore stood beside a table laden with the Academy's standard armament. But today, something was different. Next to the familiar sonic disruptors and neural dampeners sat a collection of devices that Zara had never seen before. They were dark, angular objects that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and they emanated an aura of barely contained violence that made her exoskeleton crawl. "Today's exercise will be somewhat modified," the Admiral announced to the assembled cadets. "Our human guests have requested permission to demonstrate some of their own defensive technologies, and the Academy Council has agreed that this presents a valuable learning opportunity." Commander Chen stepped forward, carrying one of the dark devices. Up close, Zara could see that it was crafted from metal and polymer composites, with an angular efficiency that spoke of pure functionality over aesthetic concerns. It looked, she realized with growing unease, like it had been designed for one purpose only. "This," Chen said, holding the device with casual familiarity, "is what we call a kinetic projectile weapon. It fires small metal projectiles at extremely high velocity using chemical propulsion." The silence that followed was profound. Cadet Tornex, a young Arcturian with bioluminescent patterns flickering nervously across his skin, raised a tentative hand. "Commander, did you say, metal projectiles?" "Correct. Small pieces of lead and copper, typically weighing between 50 and 70 grains, traveling at approximately 1,200 feet per second. Instructor Vel Karan's breathing apparatus made a sound like a deflating balloon. But the kinetic energy transfer alone would cause massive tissue damage. The impact trauma would be lethal," Chen finished matter-of-factly. "Yes, that's the intention." The word lethal hung in the air like a toxic gas. Several cadets made distressed sounds in their native languages. Zara felt her primary brain struggling to process the concept. Weapons designed specifically to kill? The very idea violated every principle of civilized warfare that she had been taught since her larvae stage. "Perhaps," Admiral Kethmore interjected quickly, "you could demonstrate the defensive capabilities of your technology using the standard training targets?" Chen nodded and gestured to his fellow humans, who had been setting up what appeared to be a firing range while the conversation continued. They moved with the same fluid efficiency Zara had observed before, creating a complex array of targets at various distances and elevations. "We'll start with basic accuracy demonstration," Chen announced. He raised his weapon, and Zara noticed that he didn't call it a defensive tool or a conflict resolution device, as was proper. He called it what it was: a weapon. The sound that erupted from the device was unlike anything Zara had ever heard. It was a sharp, explosive crack that seemed to physically assault her auditory sensors. But what followed was even more shocking. The target, a standard holographic projection unit, simply exploded. The metal casing ruptured, components scattered across a 30-meter radius, and what remained of the device sparked and died in a shower of electromagnetic interference. "Computer," Admiral Kethmore said in a voice that sounded strangled, "analyze the impact data. Kinetic energy transfer, approximately 1,500 joules delivered to a contact area of roughly 35 square millimeters. Impact velocity, 387 meters per second. Penetration depth through standard Academy barrier material. Complete. Complete penetration." Zara's mind reeled. The Academy's barrier materials were designed to stop any known weapon in the Confederation arsenal. They were rated to withstand direct hits from military-grade plasma cannons and deflect focused particle beams. Yet this primitive-looking human device had punched through them like they were made of paper. "That was fired from approximately 100 meters, Chen noted casually. "Effective range extends to roughly 800 meters with this particular configuration." 800 meters. The Academy's most powerful weapons had maximum ranges of 100 meters, and most were considerably less. Zara felt a cold sensation spreading through her thorax as the implications began to sink in. Another human, a compact female with scars visible on her hands, stepped forward with a different type of weapon. This one was larger, with a complex mechanism that seemed to incorporate multiple firing chambers. "This is a fully automatic variant," she announced. "Rate of fire, approximately 700 rounds per minute. 700 projectiles per minute." Zara's mathematical processing centers struggled with the concept. Even if the accuracy was poor, the sheer volume of lethal projectiles filling the air would create a kill zone that nothing could survive. The demonstration continued, each revelation more disturbing than the last. The humans showed weapons designed for different ranges, different targets, different tactical situations. They had devices that could eliminate single targets from impossible distances, others that could clear entire areas of enemy forces, and still others that could penetrate heavy armor or destroy fortified positions. But perhaps most shocking of all was the casual competence with which they handled these instruments of death. Every human present demonstrated familiarity with every weapon type. They could field strip and reassemble the devices blindfolded. They could estimate ranges, calculate bullet drop, compensate for environmental factors, and engage multiple targets with machine-like precision. "These skills," Instructor Yelthara asked in a voice barely above a whisper, "are they specialized training reserved for your military elite?" Commander Chen looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "No, Instructor. Basic firearms training is mandatory for all human adults on most of our worlds. These are considered fundamental survival skills." Fundamental survival skills. The full horror of what they were seeing began to dawn on the assembled Academy staff. These weren't soldiers demonstrating military hardware. These were ordinary citizens of a species that considered lethal combat proficiency to be as essential as breathing. Later that afternoon, Zara found herself assigned to a joint tactical exercise with a mixed unit that included 4 humans. The scenario was simple: infiltrate a hostile facility, retrieve vital intelligence, and extract without being detected. Standard Academy doctrine emphasized stealth, misdirection, and non-violent neutralization of any guards encountered. The humans listened politely to the briefing and nodded at appropriate moments, but Zara noticed they were also conducting their own parallel planning session using subtle hand signals and facial expressions. When the exercise began, she understood why. The Academy approach would have taken approximately 2 hours to complete successfully. The human approach took 11 minutes. Zara watched in fascination and growing horror as the four humans flowed through the simulated facility like ghosts. They anticipated guard rotations that hadn't been programmed into the exercise. They identified structural weaknesses in the building layout that the designers hadn't intended to include. They created diversions, eliminated sentries, bypassed security systems, and retrieved the target intelligence with surgical precision. But it was their casualness about the simulated violence that truly disturbed her. When they neutralized a guard, they did it with techniques that would have been instantly fatal to any real opponent. They discussed these actions in calm, professional tones, referring to confirmed kills and target elimination as if they were discussing routine maintenance procedures. Zara, one of them, a lean male with gray eyes that seemed to miss nothing, said conversationally as they moved through a corridor, "Your exoskeleton provides natural armor, but the joints are vulnerable. If you ever find yourself in a real combat situation, keep your mobility angles covered and use your natural climbing ability for vertical tactical positioning." He was giving her advice on how to kill more effectively. The realization hit her like a plasma blast to the thorax. These humans weren't just competent soldiers. They were apex predators who viewed the universe as an endless series of potential combat scenarios. Every conversation, every interaction, every casual observation was filtered through a mental framework that automatically assessed threats, calculated kill ratios, and planned for violence. That evening, the Academy's senior staff held an emergency session in Admiral Kethmore's private quarters. Zara wouldn't learn about the conversation until much later, but the shockwaves from it would ripple through the Academy for the remainder of the semester. "We have a problem," Admiral Kethmore announced without preamble. "Computer, display the tactical analysis from today's exercises." The holographic display filled with data streams, performance metrics, and comparative analyses that painted a picture too disturbing to ignore. In every measurable category, speed, efficiency, accuracy, tactical innovation, and lethality, the human performance exceeded Academy standards by margins that defied explanation. "They're not just better trained," Instructor Velkaran observed, his four eyes studying the data streams. "They're fundamentally different. Their entire cognitive framework is built around assumptions that we find abhorrent." "It's worse than that," added Instructor Yelthara, her gossamer wings trembling with distress. "I've been monitoring their biometric data during exercises. They show no stress responses to simulated violence, no elevated heart rates, no adrenaline spikes, no emotional distress markers. They exhibit the same physiological patterns while planning lethal tactics that our cadets show while studying mathematics." Admiral Kethmore activated a secure communication channel. "Computer, connect me with Confederation Military Command." The response was immediate, suggesting that Command had been expecting this call. The holographic image of Fleet Admiral Zex Thrain appeared in the center of the room, her scaled features bearing an expression of grave concern. "Admiral Kethmore, I trust you have preliminary observations regarding our guests." "Fleet Admiral, with respect, we need to discuss the human delegation immediately. Their capabilities far exceed anything in our current threat assessment models." "Explain." "They possess technology and tactical doctrine that render our current military systems obsolete. Their personal combat effectiveness exceeds our best graduates by factors that suggest fundamental biological and psychological advantages. And most disturbing of all, they appear to view lethal force as a first resort rather than a last option." The Fleet Admiral's expression didn't change, but her silence spoke volumes. "Admiral Kethmore, you will continue the exchange program as planned. Monitor all human activities and compile detailed capability assessments. Do not, under any circumstances, allow them access to classified Academy systems or strategic databases. Fleet Admiral Babad, surely the Confederation Council should be informed." "The Council has been informed. The decision has been made to proceed with the cultural exchange. Admiral, I cannot stress enough how important it is that the humans remain unaware of our concerns." The communication ended, leaving the Academy staff sitting in stunned silence. Outside, alien stars wheeled overhead, and in the dormitories below, human cadets cleaned their weapons with casual efficiency while planning the next day's exercises. Zara, of course, knew nothing of these high-level discussions. But as she lay in her sleeping alcove that night, her mind churned with images from the day's events. The explosive sound of human weapons, the casual competence with which they discussed killing, the predatory intensity in their forward-facing eyes. She had spent her entire life believing that the galaxy was a civilized place where conflicts were resolved through negotiation and restraint, where weapons were tools of last resort, designed to disable rather than destroy, where the highest military virtues were protection and preservation. The humans had shattered those assumptions in a single day. As she finally drifted toward sleep, one question echoed through her consciousness. If these 12 humans could revolutionize everything the Academy thought it knew about warfare, what would happen when the rest of the galaxy met the species that had produced them? The answer, she suspected, would reshape the balance of power among the stars forever. 3 weeks into the semester, the illusion of normalcy at Sunspire Academy finally shattered completely. The catalyst was what Academy records would later euphemistically describe as an unscheduled combat evaluation, but what everyone who witnessed it would remember as the day the humans revealed their true nature. It began during Advanced Tactical Scenarios class, when instructor Mel Thock decided to test the mixed species squads against the Academy's most challenging combat simulation. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible. A full-scale assault by overwhelming enemy forces with air support, artillery bombardment, and coordinated ground attacks. Even the Academy's best graduates typically managed only a fighting withdrawal that preserved perhaps 30% of their force. Zara found herself assigned to Squad 7, which included 5 humans led by Commander Chen, 3 Velthari, including herself, 2 Nereids, and a single Arboran. As they reviewed the tactical briefing, she noticed the humans conducting their usual parallel planning session, but this time their expressions were different. There was something in their eyes that she hadn't seen before, a cold intensity that made her exoskeleton tingle with primitive alarm signals. "The simulation is designed to be unwinnable," Instructor Mel Thock explained as the squads took their positions. "Your objective is to demonstrate tactical flexibility under impossible circumstances and preserve as many lives as possible while conducting an organized retreat." Commander Chen raised his hand. "Instructor, are there any restrictions on tactical approaches?" "None whatsoever. You may use any Academy-approved methods and equipment." The human leader's smile was barely visible, but Zara caught it. So did the other humans, who exchanged those subtle glances that always preceded something extraordinary. The simulation began with a devastating artillery barrage that would have reduced any real position to smoking rubble. The Academy's defensive barriers absorbed the holographic impacts while displaying casualty estimates that made several cadets gasp in dismay. According to the computer, they had already lost 40% of their force before the ground assault even began. What happened next would be analyzed and debated by military theorists for decades to come. Instead of taking defensive positions and preparing for an organized withdrawal as doctrine demanded, Squad 7 split into 3 elements and launched an immediate counterattack. The humans led each element, moving with their characteristic fluid coordination, while the non-human cadets struggled to keep up with tactics that violated every principle they had been taught. Zara found herself following Commander Chen as he led a flanking maneuver that took them directly into the teeth of the enemy advance. Her training screamed that this was suicide, but she watched in amazement as Chen and his human teammates systematically dismantled the holographic assault force with surgical precision. They used the environment in ways that the simulation's designers had never intended. Natural terrain features became killing grounds. Structural weaknesses in enemy formations were identified and exploited with ruthless efficiency. The humans anticipated enemy movements with uncanny accuracy, always appearing exactly where they could inflict maximum damage while minimizing their own exposure. But it was their psychological warfare that truly shocked her. The humans didn't just defeat the enemy forces, they terrorized them. They created chaos in the enemy ranks through targeted elimination of command elements. They used captured enemy equipment and communication channels to spread confusion and false orders. They turned the enemy's own tactical doctrine against them with devastating effectiveness. Within 20 minutes, the impossible scenario was over. Squad 7 had achieved complete victory with 0 casualties. The silence in the observation booth was deafening. Instructor Melthok stared at the tactical display with his main eyes, while his auxiliary eyes tracked data streams that made no sense. Computer, analyze the engagement. Compare human tactical patterns with all known military doctrine in Academy databases. Analysis complete. Human tactical patterns show no correlation with any recorded Confederation military philosophy. Closest match, extinct harvester assault protocols. Confidence level 12%. The Harvesters. Zara felt her ichor freeze in her circulatory system. Every species in the galaxy learned about the Harvesters in their basic history courses. The nightmare predators who had swept across 3 spiral arms 12,000 years ago, consuming entire civilizations before mysteriously vanishing. They were the reason the Galactic Confederation had been formed, the ultimate example of what happened when a species chose the path of total warfare. Computer, Melthok continued in a voice barely above a whisper, project probable outcomes if Squad 7 tactics were applied to current Confederation military assets. The response came after a longer pause than usual, as if the computer was reluctant to calculate the answer. Based on observed human performance parameters, estimated time for complete Confederation military defeat, 14 to 18 standard days. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. 14 days. The combined military might of 300 civilized worlds accumulated over 8 centuries of technological development and strategic planning, could be swept aside in 2 weeks by tactics that 12 humans had just demonstrated in a training exercise. Down on the exercise ground, the humans were conducting what they called an after-action review, a casual discussion of what had gone right and what could be improved. Their tone was professional, almost clinical, as they analyzed their own performance in the systematic destruction of an enemy force. "Chen, nice work on the artillery redirect," one of them was saying. "Turning their own bombardment against their advance elements cut their effective strength by 30% before we even made contact." "Thanks, Sarah. Your work on the command structure disruption was textbook. Once their coordination broke down, it was just cleanup." Cleanup. They were discussing the elimination of hundreds of simulated enemies as if they were disposing of trash. That evening, Admiral Kethmore received a priority communication that would change the course of galactic history. The message came directly from the Confederation High Council, and its contents were classified at levels that most Academy personnel didn't even know existed. "Admiral," the Council's primary speaker appeared in holographic form in his private office. "You will implement Emergency Protocol 7 immediately. All human personnel are to be isolated and contained pending arrival of a special diplomatic mission." Council Speaker, may I ask? You may not. The humans are not what they appear to be. Intelligence sources have provided additional information about their homeworld and capabilities that changes everything. Under no circumstances are they to have access to Academy systems, personnel, or equipment. They are to be treated as honored guests, but they are not to leave Academy grounds. The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Kethmore staring at a wall filled with commendations from 8 decades of faithful service. Outside his window, alien constellations wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the Academy dormitories, 12 humans continued their casual preparation for a war that the rest of the galaxy couldn't even imagine. But the humans, as it turned out, were not as oblivious to the growing tension as Academy leadership hoped. The next morning, Zara was awakened by an alarm she had never heard before, a deep, thrumming sound that seemed to resonate in her bones. Emergency lights bathed the corridors in harsh red illumination as confused cadets stumbled from their sleeping quarters, seeking explanations that no one seemed able to provide. She found the answers in the Academy's central courtyard, where a scene from her worst nightmares was unfolding in broad daylight. The humans were gone. Not just absent from their quarters, completely vanished, along with all their equipment, weapons, and personal effects. The only trace of their presence was a single message displayed on the Academy's main communication system, written in perfect galactic standard text. To our friends at Sunspire Academy, we thank you for your hospitality and the opportunity to learn about your military traditions. We hope our own demonstrations have been equally educational. We have concluded our mission here and are returning to Earth to file our report. We wish you well in your future endeavors. Commander Marcus Chen, Human Diplomatic Course. The message was signed with a symbol that made Zara's primary brain hurt to look at. A stylized representation of a world consumed in flames, with 12 stars arranged around it in a pattern that suggested both protection and threat. Admiral Kethmore's hands shook as he accessed the Academy's security systems, desperate to understand how 12 beings could simply vanish from the most secure military installation in the galaxy. The answers he found were worse than anything he could have imagined. The humans hadn't escaped. They had never been contained in the first place. Security footage revealed the impossible truth. While Academy staff had been implementing containment protocols, the humans had been systematically mapping every inch of the installation. They had identified and neutralized every security system, subverted every monitoring device, and established complete surveillance of all Academy personnel and activities. Computer, the Admiral said in a voice that had aged decades in minutes. Analyze human movement patterns since their arrival. Display all security anomalies. The holographic display filled with red warning indicators. The humans had accessed restricted databases, analyzed classified weapon systems, downloaded strategic planning documents, and somehow obtained complete technical specifications for every piece of technology in the Academy's arsenal. They had been conducting intelligence-gathering operations since the moment they arrived. Computer, project their current location based on available data. Unable to comply. No sensor contact with human personnel since 0347 hours. No spacecraft departures logged. No transportation requests filed. Human delegation has achieved complete operational invisibility. Admiral Kethmore sank into his command chair as the full scope of the disaster became clear. For 3 weeks, the galaxy's most prestigious military academy had been hosting 12 spies who possessed capabilities that rendered Confederation security measures obsolete. They had learned everything they needed to know about galactic military doctrine, technology, and strategic planning. And now they were gone, carrying that information back to a species that viewed the universe as a hunting ground. The final shock came 6 hours later when long-range sensors detected an unidentified spacecraft departing the Academy's star system. The vessel moved with impossible speed and stealth, evading every attempt at identification or intercept. But as it disappeared into hyperspace, it transmitted a single message on all Confederation frequencies. This is Commander Chen of the Earth vessel Normandy. We hereby formally withdraw humanity's application for Confederation membership. Earth has determined that our philosophical differences with your organization are irreconcilable. We will be establishing our own sphere of influence and have no intention of interfering with Confederation territories or operations. We strongly recommend that this arrangement remain mutual. The message was accompanied by a data packet that contained detailed analyses of every weakness in Confederation military doctrine, along with suggested improvements that would make their forces marginally more effective against threats they couldn't yet imagine. It was a gift, a gesture of respect from one military organization to another. It was also a warning. Zara stood in the observation deck hours later, staring out at stars that suddenly seemed much less friendly than they had a month ago. Around her, fellow cadets whispered in frightened tones about the implications of what they had witnessed. The humans had revealed themselves to be something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that had mastered warfare not through necessity or aggression, but through pure evolutionary pressure. They were what happened when a sentient race spent millions of years fighting for survival against a hostile universe, developing skills and instincts that made them the ultimate apex predators. And now they were out there among the stars, building their own civilization according to their own rules. The galaxy had gained a new neighbor, one whose very existence challenged every assumption about civilization, warfare, and survival. The Confederation's 800-year reign as the galaxy's dominant power was about to face its greatest challenge, not from external invasion or internal rebellion, but from the simple existence of a species that could fight better, move faster, strike harder, and think more tactically than anything the civilized galaxy had ever encountered. In the months that followed, reports would trickle in from the frontier regions, human settlements appearing on worlds that other species had deemed uninhabitable. Human traders offering technologies that shouldn't have been possible. Human diplomats negotiating agreements that somehow always favored human interests. But for now, Zara simply stood and watched the stars, wondering what kind of future awaited a galaxy that had just discovered it wasn't alone at the top of the food chain. The answer would come sooner than anyone expected, and it would change everything.